When it comes to fake news, it's not all about Donald Trump. We have liberals who have a core set of beliefs that informs how they cover a story, any story. So if it's not only Donald Trump, if it's a topic they don't like, if it's an industry they don't like, if it's another politician they don't like, then stories get skewed to meet the coverage and or meet the prejudices of the reporter or reporters. I bring that up today. This will be my lead into some discussion about the media, which is our top story today on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 59. Thank you for joining us today. Highs in the upper 70s projected today. Lots of great weather ahead all the way through the upcoming Independence Day holiday. Weather a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch in Mountain Home. This is from a liberal rag called Salon. The Salon is an online publication. It's a magazine. And in fact, I printed the story up today and it's magazine length. I mean, it's one of the longest stories that I've printed out in quite some time. And the reporter, well, this is the headline. The headline isn't always written by the reporter. The headline is Repeated Radiation Warnings Go Unheeded at Sensitive Idaho Nuclear Plant. And then the writer goes into all of the problems that they've had with radiation leaking at Idaho National Laboratory, which he continues to refer to throughout the piece as a nuclear power plant. As I say, it's long and it's lengthy, and you have to go almost to the very end of it to read where the Department of Energy looked into all of these claims and basically found nothing. Well, why would you have this big story and put that up front? You want people to read all the way to the back and go, oh, wait a minute. But the funniest part of this was I happened to be looking at it online this morning, and I went down to the comments section, and the very first comment is from a fellow who says, I need to remind you, it's not a nuclear power plant. It's a nuclear research facility. In other words, they move radioactive things around. That's what they do. So to sit here and say that this is taking place at a nuclear power plant, that's not the case. It's a research facility. So if you can't get that straight at the top of the story, it sows doubt about your story, your entire story. The credibility of it is harmed. I had an old managing editor who told me something many, many years ago, and it was along these lines. He said, if we can't be truthful, or we can't be factual about a couple of small things, he said, then that will sow doubt about everything that we do. And I think that that's a lesson to live by for people in media, but I don't know that it's being carried any longer in newsrooms. It was a huge policy in the places I worked, but we're talking. I've been out of the daily news grind for almost 20 years, and I don't know how things are in most newsrooms today. But I'm guessing that most of these people feel that they are advocates now for a particular class or a particular political philosophy, and they've accepted that that philosophy is right and it's the only philosophy out there. It's their religion, their dogma, and they're not going to surrender it. And they report, and all of the news they report is from that perspective. Coming up on 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Also, we'll be joined by the folks from Tripp Family Medicine in about 20 minutes. We do that Wednesday mornings between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. A Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. It's been on the air with us now for quite some time. It's your opportunity, if you've got a medical issue, to speak directly with one of the medical professionals. Dr. Tripp's office is still looking for new patients, and they can often see you on the very same day if you call in the morning with a medical issue. The office located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. So we talk about media this morning and where media is going, and it's completely off the rails. There's a writer by the name of Michael Goodwin at the New York Post. He used to be a reporter at the New York Times. He got worn out with the New York Times and walked away from his job there, took a job as a columnist at the Post, and he has been a critic of liberals in media ever since then. And he's reciting a story about when he was a young reporter decades ago, and he was sent to cover an announcement about some big charitable event in a Manhattan high-rise. And he doesn't say who was presiding over this news conference as far as the person who was behind the charity. It was probably one of those individuals, Babe Paley. She was legendary in New York for that. Kitty Carlisle. These women were involved in charities in the arts communities, and they lived in these Manhattan high-rises, and they spent all of their time working on these issues. So these reporters all come into this big living room where this woman is having the event, And the reporter suddenly walks over to a vase and he pulls the roses out of the vase and he drinks the water in the vase in one gulp. Then the woman who's hosting this event is horrified and she looks at the guy and she says, "What are you doing?" And the reporter says, "I was thirsty." Goodwin says that was an embarrassing moment to be a journalist, but things have gotten a lot worse. What's going on now is far more. I have my own experience. I was working as a television news director, and we had a young photographer named Beardo. He would have been described in the 1950s and 60s as a beatnik. Beardo was a bit of a slob. He just went about his life without a care in the world. And he had to go out on a story with one of the reporters one day, and the reporter went up to knock on a door in this beautiful suburban neighborhood. And Beardo was waiting back by the sidewalk with his camera. And nobody was home. Luckily, nobody was home because when the reporter turned around, he was horrified to find that Beardo was urinating on the shrubberies on the property of the home where they were looking to get an interview. Broad daylight in a suburban neighborhood. Apparently, none of the neighbors saw this, which was a good thing. And he said to Beardo, "Why are you doing that?" And Beardo said, "I have to pee." So he just decided, well, this is perfect. Somebody's house with their shrubs. I'll just do it here. Never mind the exposure charge he could have brought and the embarrassment to the television station, his employer. But that's the type of thing that we used to deal with a lot of people in media. Some of these people aren't very civilized in the first place. Now the problem has become, it's much more serious. It's what the president and his staff now label fake news. A guy peeing on shrubs is minor compared to the journalistic malpractice that we're currently seeing in this country. When a reporter yesterday took umbrage with Sarah Huckabee, she's one of the spokespeople at the White House. She was filling in during the press briefing yesterday. When a reporter took umbrage with what she was saying, the reporter said, "Well, how do you expect us to get our jobs done?" Now, she gave a polite answer to that, but what she should have said was, "That's not my problem." Many, many years ago, I was doing an interview with the leader of the Oneida Indian Nation, and he had won a series of court cases getting back some of the land that had been promised to his tribe 200 and some odd years ago by treaty, and then had been violated. He was also using his gambling casino. By the way, this guy was campaigning against the use of the name Washington Redskins, but he was making all of his money off a gambling casino. In other words, off the addictions, the troubles that people have in their lives. They were using the money, the proceeds from gambling. The tribe was buying land that they didn't win back in court. And I said, "Well, what happens to all of the people who are living there already when you push them off the land?" And he said, "That's not my problem." And if I had been Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I would have said the same thing yesterday. It's not the job of the White House to do the stories for the people in the media. It's not that. When I was young and I'd go out to a news conference at City Hall or speak to the governor or anyone else, if I had said, "Hey, I want you to throw me a few bones here, make my life easy so I can go home and mail this in or go back to work and mail this in," they would have looked at me like I had a horn coming out of the middle of my forehead, and rightly so. 8:15, Bill Colley. But the entitlement culture seems to have not only swept our colleges over the last few generations, but apparently the newsrooms of America too. And there's this belief that all of these things are owed to them. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, responding to a reporter yesterday during the White House briefing, take a listen as she dresses them down.
I think it's the constant barrage of fake news directed at this president probably that has garnered a lot of his frustration. You point to that report. There are multiple other instances where that outlet that you referenced has been repeatedly wrong and had to point that out or be corrected. There's a video circulating now. Whether it's accurate or not, I don't know, but I would encourage everybody in this room and frankly everybody across the country to take a look at it. I think if it is accurate, I think it's a disgrace to all of media, to all of journalism. I think that we have gone to a place where if the media can't be trusted to report the news, then that's a dangerous place for America.
What she's referring to is the Project Veritas video, which was put together by James O'Keefe. He's the man behind that organization. And it shows a CNN producer basically admitting that this whole Russia thing is a means to get Trump and to drive ratings, even though they all know there's nothing to it. CNN now is in full, what you might call bunker mode and saying, oh, well, that guy doesn't really work in the unit that would be concentrating on this anyway. Well, in response to that, James O'Keefe last night announced on Facebook that there's another video coming today. It should be out about 10 o'clock this morning, our time, and it will be far more damning of what's going on at the Clinton News Network, known by the acronym CNN. So expect that coming up, that next bombshell a little later this morning. Also, the media last night jumped all over Donald Trump because apparently at some of his golf clubs, there's a Photoshop picture of Trump on a Time magazine cover. And the media says, well, he talks about fake news. That's a fake magazine cover. They didn't do a Time magazine piece on him like that. Did you know? I used to go to carnivals with my little girl and my niece, and I would take them to carnivals or to amusement parks. There's a small cottage industry in getting your photograph taken and put on the title of one of your favorite magazines. This is not unusual, and it's entertaining, and people like to take them home and hang them on their walls and sometimes in their places of business to do these things, and it's meant kind of tongue in cheek. And yet media saying, well, yeah, but look at what he's done. He's got his picture on Time magazines now demanding that he take them down. What are they going to do? Come over and break his arms? They're going out of business and circling the drain faster than your toilet after you flush it. By the way, some television photographers need to use. So we've got them screaming and yelling about this because Mr. Trump has done something that you'd find at a lot of carnival booths across the country. Well, Roll Call, which is a magazine based on Capitol Hill, or newspaper based on Capitol Hill, has this. Chris Van Hollen had his own fake Time magazine cover. Who's Chris Van Hollen? Liberal, flaming liberal Democrat in the House of Representatives from Maryland. And he did it because he had an opponent running against him in a state race many, many years ago. The opponent was related to the Kennedy family, and the opponent had his picture put on Time magazine. So Van Hollen turned around and did a mailing with his own picture and a headline on a Time magazine cover. And Time denounced it then, but he did it, and it worked effectively. He won the election. It just shows you, though, the madness of the left and the media in this country, how they've just gone absolutely, they're rabid animals now. They're frothing at the mouth. And what do you normally do with a rabid dog? Well, we shouldn't go that far with media, but maybe they need to be replaced. That might be the best way to look at this, with some people who actually have some real journalistic chops and perhaps, I don't know, just say that they have a conscience, and maybe that would solve the problem. It's 8:20. Bill Colley with you. We have a hard break here. Got to take the break. I'll take your phone calls afterwards. It's 60. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I wanted to point out, again, we have the folks from Trip Family Medicine joining us in about 10 minutes. Also, I wanted to mention quickly, we are going to have a cooling trend the next few days. It's still going to be very nice, but by next week, late next weekend, or this coming weekend, and then through next week, temperatures expected to be in the 90s for the foreseeable future. If you're having trouble with your air conditioning unit, you need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric, and they'll come out and they'll get the job done right, and they'll get it done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy summers are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, which is located in Burley. And in fact, some of you have likely dropped by the shop before. 2600 Overland Avenue, the telephone number, 678-0459. That's 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Telephone number for reaching our program, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're on the air.
You never let anybody say the truth because you're a numbnut. You cannot even get your story straight. When somebody tells you the facts, numbnuts, you can't get it together.
Wow, that's great evidence on your part. That's great evidence. Another brilliant liberal call. How come the Democrats have appointed that guy locally as their spokesperson? Are you telling me that old lady who now runs the local Democrat Party, that she can't find anybody more articulate than that? Is that how far they've had to stoop? Because, well, there aren't very many of them. So they have to scrape this guy off the bottom of the barrel and have him. All right, what facts? Hello? Did you cite anything? No. Did you contradict anything I said? No. You called me names. That's it. That's all they've got left, folks. They got nothing else. They got nothing else. All they want to do is scream, workers of the world unite, and think that we're all going to pay their freight. Telephone number 736-0300, 736-0300. And you can speak to us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That old lady wrote a column a couple of weeks ago in the newspaper complaining about the fact that I pointed out that media was in bed with the Democrat Party. Of course, she's just protecting her minions. They work for her, so she had to rush in to defend them because, well, media simply can't defend itself. That's so obvious what's going on. This is from Eric Erickson, writing at his website, The Resurgent. This is what he says. Mental retardation is one of many severe and devastating side effects from inbreeding. We are seeing that on display in the American political press right now, as Democrats and left-wing activists cross over into the political press posing as objective reporters, and objective reporters become Democrat operatives. The inbreeding in the New York City-D.C. corridor has taken new and frightful turns. The most recent is a self-obsessed paranoia. The Democrat press has now fallen for at least 1 dozen false reports that have had to be retracted about Russia and the Trump campaign. He goes on for about 3 pages discussing this. On the other hand, he's a conservative, and I suppose a lot of people will say, well, how dare he? Even though he's factually correct when he says that there are 1 dozen of these stories. And in fact, I have another clipping here from Glenn Greenwald. He has a website called The Intercept. Greenwald is not a conservative. He's an investigative reporter. I believe that he has a long history of voting for Democrats. And he literally breaks down all 12 of these and often is explaining, and he explains through detail. This is a very long piece at his website. He explains in detail how in many cases reporters didn't have that skepticism they needed. In other words, people would come to them and tell them things, anonymous sources, sometimes just one, and they would share these things, and these people would then go out and report it because they hate Trump so much. They didn't verify what they had. And as I say, this is highly detailed. Embarrassments of this sort are literally too numerous, he writes, to count when it comes to hype viral U.S. media stories over the last year. Less than a month before its electric grid farce, the Washington Post published a blockbuster story, largely based on a blacklist issued by a brand new, entirely anonymous group featuring the shocking assertion that stories planted or promoted by Russia's disinformation campaign were viewed more than 213 million times. The thing is, all of these people, that story fell apart, he writes immediately, but all of these people who are reporting these things, all of these left-wing yammerers who are reporting these things, when the retraction gets sent out, or the semi-apology, that doesn't get anywhere near the coverage that the initial lie did. So which one of those does the public end up remembering? There's a writer named Holman Jenkins. He writes for the Wall Street Journal. That's an appropriate name for a columnist there. Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. to be exact. And he's explaining that if Russia did anything to interfere with the election, and by the way, media may be telling you that Russia switched votes. It didn't. No votes were ever switched. Those votes were all, a lot of them were from illegal aliens, so we can't say that they were accurate. But he goes on to say that Russia planted a few stories that influenced James Comey when he came to his investigation of Hillary Clinton. And he says, if you get a chance, you got to read this. He says, you've got to find out exactly how Comey was influenced and how that impacted the actual outcome of the election. You're up next. You're on the air at 8:28. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Well, tell a lie often enough, especially when you got the power of the mass media, and pretty soon it becomes fact. Take, for example, the global warming hoax. I mean, they're spending $360 billion a year to push this lie down our throat, and thank God that Trump had the gumption to be able to just say, we're not going to do that. It's costing us jobs and factories, and our economy is going down the toilet continually because of this false narrative. But the narrative, of course, is the New World Order, and everything has to go toward that direction. And Trump has just absolutely been a bulldozer to go through the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all these things. and they don't like it because it's really upset their plans to make us all slaves on their global plantation. And well, anyway, the New York Times, Washington Post have absolutely been the leaders, along with CNN and others now, to promote this false narrative, false stories, and they don't really, because they don't like Trump. They're not going to like Trump because he's been a real roadblock and taken opposition. Well, who was it? I think in the Hitler administration, goes way back there. And
well, I got to let you run. We've got to pick this up a little bit later because I've got a break, and then I've got Trip Family Medicine coming up in a few minutes. We're at 60. Bill Colley with you at 8:30 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com.